Hey y'all, this is Brown at IF Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about Breakin' and Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo on DVD. So this is a bare bones double feature DVD release set in the sense that you have, both movies released on one disc each, but the only thing in the way of special features is a theatrical trailer for Breakin' 2. So Breakin' and Breakin' 2 were both released in 1984 by the Cannon Group. And the Cannon Group was a B-movie production company that was masterminded by Menahem Golem and Yoram Globus, two Israeli cousins that had a passion for movies. They loved watching movies, they loved making movies. They just didn't seem to know how to make good ones. So one of the things that happened with the Cannon Group was that they had a lot of movies under their banner that came out, but because of the amount of movies that they were turning out, the finances that the Cannon Group had struggled to keep up, with the workload. And so most of the films that came out of the Cannon Group were very low budget. But sometimes you would have some hits, if not, critically, then at least financially. So case in point, Breakin'. It was made on a budget of $1.2 million, but it made $38.7 million at the box office. So whether you liked the movie or not, you could not deny that it was a financial success. And some say that it was the last financially profitable film that the Cannon Group made, and a lot of that was because it was the last film that came out in their distribution deal with MGM. And MGM, had a lot to do with, some of the movies, being, more financially successful than others, simply because of distribution, but, once MGM pulled, their support, the Cannon Group really had to, struggle, with how to, finance their movies. And apparently the reason that MGM, pulled their support from Cannon was because Cannon, put out a movie called Bolero, which I've never seen, but apparently there's some X-rated material in there that, ruffled MGM's feathers, and MGM, they don't mess with X-rated stuff, and so we're talking like pornographic stuff, right? And so that was a point of contention with MGM, so MGM pulled their support, which sort of coincided with Breakin' happening to be the last picture that came out of that particular partnership. So Breakin' was a hit financially, but it was arguably the last genuinely financially profitable film that came out of the Cannon Group. So even though you had other movies that were financially successful, they weren't, say, full-on box office hits like, say, Breakin' was. So Breakin', though, was in competition with another film called Beat Street. And, and both films focused on breakdancing, but the movers and shakers of the Cannon Group, saw to it that Breakin' made it to the big screen before Beat Street did. And so even though Beat Street is reputedly a better movie than Breakin', Breakin' was the film that introduced a lot of people in the mainstream public to the phenomenon of breakdancing. So Breakin', in my opinion, is actually a good movie. I mean, it has its flaws. I mean, and there is some cheesiness, that kind of goes hand in hand with being a part of the 80s. I mean, I love the 80s, but a lot of movies that came out of the 80s, from a cultural standpoint, there is a certain amount of cheese to them. But you can say that about just about any decade, to be honest. But I do like 80s movies, so I think that a lot of them were pretty cool too. So, but just from a cultural standpoint, you grow up in a certain time and you look at stuff from, the past, and you're kind of like, I mean, there's a bit of cheese inevitably, right? But that aside, I thought that Breakin', did a good job of, introducing one to, say, the music scene, of breakdancing. And, there was a fairly relatable story in there as well. And also, there was a certain amount of grittiness that, kept things grounded in reality to some degree. I mean, there was some flamboyance and some over the top theatricality to some of the scenes, but it never once felt like, reality had gone out to lunch. I mean, it felt like, hey, this is, part of the theatricality that comes with, the world of dancing in general, so there you go. But it also touched on, say, class differences, rich and poor and things like that, racism and things like that. I mean, it didn't focus a whole lot on them, but it touched on them enough to where it's like, okay, there's something real here. There's something raw, along with, the, magic of, the music and the choreography and everything and the breakdancing. So Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo, not so much. Reality more or less goes out to lunch in this movie. And Electric Boogaloo has basically become, a code word for unnecessary sequel. And so not only was Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo, an unnecessary sequel to Breakin', but it's gone down as one of the worst sequels ever made. So oddly enough, it was financially successful at the box office, in the sense that on a $3 million budget, it made $15 million at the box office. But unlike Breakin', wasn't a box office hit, or at the very least, it wasn't, a significantly profitable film. But the odd thing about Breakin' 2 is that, considering who directed the movie, I'm surprised it's as bad as it was, because Sam Furstenberg directed Breakin' 2, and a guy named Joel Silberg directed the first Breakin'. So I haven't seen anything by Joel Silberg, so I can't really judge the rest of his work, but I have seen a couple of movies by Sam Furstenberg. Revenge of the Ninja, American Ninja, Avenging Force. I'm not going to say those three were quote-unquote good movies, but they were decent movies, and there was a certain charm to them, and there was a certain formula to them. That's probably a better word. There was a certain formula to them, from in the realm of action, to where it's like, you want to sit back and have a beer on a Friday night, or or something along those lines, or get together with some friends and have some fun, but not exactly in a Mystery Science Theater way, but just like, I mean, okay, there's some cheesiness here, but there's also some awesome action scenes too. So so Sam Furstenberg, I mean, he's definitely made some decent movies, and so with that in mind, seeing that he was the director of Breakin' 2 was kind of mind-boggling. So simply because of how bad Breakin' 2 was in comparison to how decent those other three movies were that he directed. But who knows, maybe he had an off day, or maybe he just was the wrong guy to direct a musical, but yeah, that's the main thing though with Breakin' 2. It's like Breakin', music was a key component in both Breakin' and Breakin' 2. It was it was, say, a world of music in Breakin', but at the same time there were some grounded characters within this world, like dancing and the music playing and things like that. But Breakin' 2 literally becomes a musical. I mean, we're talking people stopping what they're doing to dance and sing at the drop of a hat, albeit with a bit of albeit with more so with some old school rap and hip hop thrown in, but yeah, it's just like you compare the two movies and it's just like, man, what the heck happened, and I don't know, it's like, Electric Boogaloo, I feel like if it had been released as a standalone movie, say for example if Breakin' had never happened, I'm not saying that Electric Boogaloo would have been a good movie, but if it had been released as it was, albeit without having to be in the shadow of Breakin', then at the very least, it probably wouldn't go down as one of the worst sequels ever made, just, a standalone bad movie. But because, it came off the heels of, the financially, profitable, as well as, the culturally significant film Breakin', yeah, it has the mark of one of the worst sequels ever made going against it. So, but yeah, let's go ahead and get into them. So, starting with Breakin', it starts off with a character named Kelly, played by Lucinda Dickey, who is aspiring to be, a Broadway dancer, and she's in California, or I should say, she's aspiring to be a Broadway level dancer, and she's working in a studio in California, and she has a dance partner and friend named Adam, who basically, the two of them, they work together, they clown around together, but they take dancing very seriously. And the studio's head is a guy named Franco, who makes it very clear that he's, kind of got the hots for, Kelly. And he keeps saying that, hey, I can make sure I can see to it that you get an audition for such and such, just gotta, And so she's like, no, let's just keep it professional, But one day, Adam introduces Kelly to two dancers named, let's see, I gotta get the names here. Ozone and Turbo, played by Adolfo Shabba Quinones and Michael Boogaloo Shrimp Chambers, respectively. So Ozone and Turbo are two master level break dancers, and Kelly has never seen anything like their stuff before, and so she's very captivated by what she's watching, simply because of the choreography involved is like a whole nother level. And so Adam introduces her to the two of them, and they actually hit it off, and to a point where they become friends, and Kelly invites them to come with them to the studio that she and Adam practice at. But unfortunately, Franco takes it upon himself to be a complete douchebag to them, and basically be all judgmental, saying that they're just street riffraff, and they're just tourists in my world and all this crap. And so shortly after that, Franco basically makes the dumb choice of trying to sexually assault Kelly. Like he tries to forcefully kiss her at one point, because he's trying to have a little solo audition with her, and she's initially going along with it, because she's trying to get a feel for a certain level of, I guess you could say, artistry, but in the process though, Franco forces himself on her, and so she freaks out and bails on him, and basically leaves the studio, and so at this point in time, her friend and dance partner Adam doesn't exactly know why she's left. She's just like, hey, I just had to move on to other things. But in the meantime, though, she comes into further contact with Ozone and Turbo, and sees what their world's like. There's this dance club that they're basically fixtures at, and there's these breakdancing competitions that go on there, and she sees them at work and everything, and they're in competition with this other breakdancing group named Electro Rock. And at first it's Ozone and Turbo against two other guys in Electro Rock, but then when they bring a woman in, that's when Ozone and Turbo end up losing the dance battle, because now there's 3 against 2. And so Kelly and Adam, they kind of they end up running the idea by Ozone and Turbo, like, hey, why don't you teach Kelly how to dance? Like, I mean, she already knows how to dance, but show her how to break dance, how y'all move, and so that way y'all can have someone to even out the playing field. And so at first, Ozone and Turbo, I mean, are a little reluctant to take her on, because I mean it's a whole nother world, I mean, culturally and aesthetically. But gradually though, they're able to teach her how to break dance, and to where it's like, even though she comes from another world socially, she's able to move like them on the dance floor and everything. And so so when she joins up with them to have round two, or with the other breakdancing group, they win. And so around this time though, she's actually getting offers from people at prestigious venues, to where she has a shot at auditioning at on Broadway level musicals or dances. And her manager, a guy named James, who actually a decent guy, right? He initially is sort of reluctant to have her be a part of the breakdancing scene, because he's initially just seeing it as street level riffraff dancing. But then he sees her, he watches her with Ozone and Turbo, because she invites them, or she invites James to see them in action on this particular night, where they square off with Electro Rock. And so when James sees the level of talent and artistry that's going into breakdancing, he's like, okay, this is a thing here. And so he actually works with them to try and get them a spot on, say, a high level venue. But unfortunately though, I guess the reality is that on a societal level, the people who are the movers and the shakers and the prestigious dance scenes just aren't ready to willingly bring on someone from the streets. And so unfortunately there is some conflict there. So it's like the talent there is there, the art is there, but the people who pull the strings just aren't wanting to take a chance with it just yet. And so from there, Kelly and Ozone Turbo have to work together to basically get to where it's like, okay, they already work as a unit, they work as a team, but they have to see what they can do to show the people who are the movers and the shakers that the streets have a music all their own. So yeah, with that being said, Breakin, as a movie, I thought did a really good job of introducing one to, say, the world of breakdancing, and say the music life that the streets had in the 1980s. And you had a wonderful set of songs to go along with the scenes of choreography and dancing. And you had things like, say, 99 and a half by Carolyn Towns, Bodywork by Hot Streak, Freak Show on the Dance Floor by the Bar Keys, Beatbox by Art of Noise. I mean, that turns up at one point. I was like, whoa, hey, I recognize that, and Ain't Nobody by Rufus and Shaka Khan. I mean, all great songs and all used to very good effect. But when it came to say like, the dance scenes, I mean, whether we're talking, say, prior to, Kelly, getting involved in the breakdancing scene, like when she's in the studio with, the other dancers under, Franco's eye. I mean, yeah, I mean, things don't go so well with Franco, but the choreography and everything is very well done. But then, of course, once it comes to the breakdancing stuff, that's where it goes from, oh, wow, that's pretty cool, to, whoa, I mean, how the heck did they do that? Or, oh man, it's just, you see some amazing stuff. I mean, some wonderful choreography. And, and that's one of the things where it's like, Lucinda Dickey, she's not exactly what I would call a, top level actress, but, because her chemistry with, say, Adolfo Quinones, and Michael Chambers. It's like, when it comes to, say, the dialogue and acting, at least on her part, it's kind of stiff. But on the other hand, when it comes to just, the three of them, playing off of each other, when it comes to dancing, and what have you, that's when it's like, okay, there's actually physical chemistry there. And Lucinda Dickey was, if I remember correctly, she actually was a jazz dancer, so she already had some athletic capabilities. And so seeing her with Adolfo Quinones, who was a highly acclaimed choreographer, a wonderful dancer, seeing, the two of them, work together along with Michael Chambers, I mean, who, has, his own rhythm when it comes to breakdancing. I mean, it's like all three individuals, were phenomenal to watch on screen, just on a purely physical level, when it came to, say, just the act of dancing. I mean, it was just a marvel to behold. And so when all three of them are dancing together, that's when, you get some, straight up magic, okay? And so, so you have the beautiful choreography along with, the awesome music. And there were so many moments where I was actually, one, at first I was kind of, just bobbing my head a bit, or, just sort of, dancing, stamping my feet in time to the beat and everything. But then there'd be moments where I'd just be, sitting up and going like, yes, or just, in amazement, or just, being awestruck at, how, amazing some of the, choreography was. And so basically, I appreciate Breakin for having that sort of, magical touch to it that really, put you in, this whole other world, And so, and even though Lucinda Dickey's, acting is a bit wooden, there were moments where, that aforementioned grittiness kind of came into play. And there's at least one scene where she played something very well, or she played off a moment very well. And that was when she's, sexually assaulted by Franco, when he tries to, forcefully kiss her. It's a good bit of acting on her part, because on one hand, prior to him forcing himself on her, when he's trying to get her to, go along with, the dance number that he's wanting her to do, like there's this beautiful, music that's playing on the speakers in the studio. And, there's a very ethereal, sense of movement and grace, just from the standpoint of, choreography and dancing. And you could tell that, she's really, getting into the moment, both as a character and as a dancer. And so that's some good physical acting on her part. But then when, Franco, forces himself on her, it's like, she's, shocked and horrified. But it's in a very believable way. Like, it comes across as a very realistic moment, and you hear about stuff like that happening in real life, and it actually feels real. And, she, pushes him away and, storms off and, gets into her car and sort of breaks down in tears. And it's not something that comes across as, cheesy or sappy. Like, it feels, like something that might have actually happened, because stuff like that really does happen, unfortunately. Like, people who try to say, give, certain people that they're attracted to, potential benefits, if they'll do something for them, if you catch my drift. And so, I mean, in that moment, I thought that she did a good job. I just wish that, her chemistry with, Adolfo Quinones and, Michael Chambers had been better. Like, and when I say chemistry, I just mean chemistry in terms of acting. But when it came to the dancing, that's when, she was great, okay? Now, Adolfo Quinones and Michael Chambers, those two guys were awesome, okay? Some might say that their, characters were a bit more, comical than expected, in the sense that this is like a, sort of gritty real world setting, but there's a certain flamboyance to them, that, if you're not used to, say, the theatricality of, any music scene, you might be kind of thrown off by them. But the thing is, it's like, if you've been a part of the music scene in any way, it has a certain flamboyance and theatricality that kind of goes with the territory. And so, Adolfo Quinones and Michael Chambers, I mean, both of them were already, phenomenal dancers, and they were sort of some of the trendsetters when it came to, say, like breakdancing and things like that. And, and they just, made the scenes their own, to a point where not only were they just, physical, gods on the dance floor, but they were also, some very likable characters. And I liked how they had a certain dynamic between them, with, Adolfo being this, slightly more, serious one, and, Michael Chambers being the more goofy one. But at the same time, I mean, there was a seriousness that they had in certain moments, like, say, when Adam's, introducing, Kelly to them, and, Ozone's, Adolfo's character is clearly, attracted to Kelly. But then, of course, Turbo, Michael Chambers' character, is saying, hey, she's not one of us. I mean, she's never going to be one of us. And there's like a hostility there that, it feels real, but it doesn't feel unwarranted, considering, where they all are culturally. And so I do like how there is that bit of attraction between, Kelly and Ozone, but there is a bit of harsh reality, not only with, say, Turbo's, reaction to their burgeoning attraction, but there are also, a few scenes, later on in the movie where, you see how, people, in, say, a higher spot in society are looking down on, Ozone and Turbo because, they're black street dancers, and so there is, a bit of commentary on racism, which, while it doesn't become, say, it doesn't dominate the movie, but it has enough of a presence to where, it adds to the gritty feel. It's kind of like, I mean, yeah, they might, be, in harmony on the dance floor, but outside of that, though, people are going to be judging them. People are going to be looking down on them because, just culturally speaking, they don't get it, And so I got to say that Adolfo Quinones, one of the things that, he's said in interviews, back when he was still alive, because sadly he passed away not that long ago. I think it was in 2020. So, hats off to Adolfo. But one of the things that he said was that, Breakin brought more people together than the UN ever did. And I actually believe it, because, I mean, there was a night a dance club that I used to go to back in the day, and unfortunately, it was one of the casualties of 2020. It was a place called the Church. I mean, it was technically called the Lizard Lounge, but on Sunday nights it would become the Church, and it was like for the goth crowd. And I mean, I don't consider myself goth, but I like goth music, you know, and so going there was like a whole other world, and there was a certain element of theatricality and flamboyance to the whole scene, you know, but it drew you in and just enchanted you. And me, you know, whenever I was there, it was just like a whole nother world, and I danced my heart out. And obviously, this is before I broke my femur. You know, if I tried to do that now, I'd probably kill myself on accident. You know, but but it was a lot of fun. And I saw so many people from different walks of life, you know, sort of just coming together to just enjoy, you know, the magic moment that the music gave them. And so I understand that, you know, a goth nightclub and, you know, a breakdancing club are two different things, but, you know, or two different scenes. But at the same time, because, you know, of having the experience that I had at the goth club, in the times that I went there, you know, I get, you know, what Adolfo Quinones was talking about bringing bringing people together, and about how dancing brings people together. So, and another surprise, as far as acting goes, was Christopher McDonald, Shooter McGavin himself from Happy Gilmore. So Christopher McDonald, you know, or Chris McDonald, where you want to call him, because sometimes, you know, you go by Chris, right? But, you know, he has a reputation for playing a bad guy, or he's oftentimes typecast as playing if not a bad person, then at least, you know, a sleazy one. But here, though, you know, as you know, Kelly's manager, James, you know, he is actually a decent guy, or he plays a decent guy. And so, you know, I liked how the movie sort of subverted that expectation. Now, mind you, I'm not sure exactly, you know, what kind of roles Chris McDonald had, you know, around this time period, but I just know that, like, you know, from the 90s onward, you know, he usually played, you know, sleazy or, you know, bad guys, you know. But here, though, I mean, he plays a genuinely good dude, and I do like how, you know, he's one of the many, you know, skeptics that, you know, initially looks down on the whole breakdancing scene and the street scene in general. But once he sees it in action, once, you know, he, you know, takes Kelly's invitation to see her, you know, and, you know, Ozone and Turbo in action together, you know, his eyes are opened. And I mean, yes, he's a businessman, so he sees this as a wonderful opportunity, you know, to show, you know, something new to, you know, people, but at the same time, just on a basic human level, you know, he's been elevated, and, you know, just almost on a spiritual level, I guess. And I liked seeing that. I liked seeing how other people who were sort of outsiders, you know, kind of are just drawn into the magic that, you know, this wonderful music scene has. And so, so yeah, it's like, so even though there was, you know, a bit of, you know, stiff acting on Lucinda Dickey's part, I thought that it was like the magic of the movie was able to sort of counterbalance that particular aspect of it, as well as, you know, some of the moments where it was kind of like, overall, I thought that, you know, when they had the serious moments, I thought they did a good enough job to where, you know, it kind of kept the movie, you know, grounded in reality to some degree. But I will say that there are moments where some of the people come across as cartoonish, like some of the people who are being snobby and looking down on, you know, the whole breakdancing scene. Like, they come across as, you know, mustache twirling villains at times. But thankfully, though, they aren't focused on, you know, a whole lot. And for the most part, you know, the, you know, snobs and, you know, dirtbags that are focused on are given a little bit more credibility as far as characters go. Because, like, in the case of, say, Franco, who was played by Ben Lokey, you know, Franco, you know, in the wrong hands, could have been the mustache twirling villain, who was a snob extraordinaire. And so, I mean, he was a villain and he was a snob extraordinaire, but at the same time, he doesn't come across as a mustache twirling villain. He comes across as a very real, privileged, elite villain. Or I should say, he comes across as a very believable villain in the elite world of dancing. Okay, someone who uses his position of power, to take advantage of other people. And you get the idea that he may have done this before. And so whenever he was on screen, there is a sense of, harsh reality, that, comes into play, especially because of, the scene where he forces himself on, Kelly. So I thought that when it focused on him, they did a better job of, showing a bit of commentary on, say, the cultural differences, between, say, street level dancers and, quote unquote elite level dancers. And you saw that just because, one class is, quote unquote lower than the other, that doesn't, make, the elites better. In fact, it kind of makes them worse in a lot of ways, because they abuse their positions of power. But so when it was focusing on stuff like that, I thought that the movie did a good job of, showing, the tension, that comes, with the territory of, such scenes in the world. But overall, though, I thought that the movie, did a good job of, introducing, one to, a wonderful, new realm of, music and dancing, as well as, being a, fairly believable, story in some gritty, realm of reality. So I'm going to go ahead and give Breakin' 1 4 out of 5 stars. Breakin' was a good movie. So, all right, now let's go to Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo. All right, so Kelly at this point has, basically made a name for herself. She's, a Broadway level dancer, and, she's getting all sorts of opportunities, to advance her career. But in the meantime, though, she's, sort of, looking back on her time dancing with, Ozone and Turbo, and, sort of the, camaraderie they had, the chemistry they had on the dance floor. And, she's really starting to miss it, because, just, the fact on one hand, she's doing what she initially wanted, like she's going forward in her career. But when she, was introduced to the world of breakdancing, and to them specifically, it was like something magical happened. And so, she misses that. And so when her parents find out that, she's wanting to look her old friends up, they do, everything they can to try and, talk her out of it or change her mind, because, like so many other people, they look down on the world of breakdancing and street level dancing in general. But, she turns her back on them and goes, to see her friends. And so Ozone and Turbo at this point, have somehow, been able to, work with other people to make this, community center for disadvantaged children and street kids. And, there's like all sorts of facilities there for them, like they get something to eat, they can get a clean shower, place to sleep and thing. And so, it's something, good for the community. But when almost as soon as Kelly arrives, to reunite with them and catch up with them, the community center is threatened by this, corporate group that wants to, bulldoze it and, use the, newly empty space for, a mall or shopping, a shopping center. And so, with malls. And so basically, these guys do everything they can, to, rig the system in their favor. And, and so at this point, Ozone and Turbo and Kelly have to, find some way to, beat the fat cats, as it were, and use the power of music to sway public opinion in their favor. And oh boy, so trying to logically explain electric Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo, that's probably as close as I can come to giving a a relatively serious take on the story, because aside from that premise, the movie does not take itself seriously at all, and it does not work out in the movie's favor at all. That approach does not work out in the movie's favor, because the first movie did such a good job of keeping things centered in a reasonably believable world, whereas this movie goes all out and all over the place. You literally have people like walking up to characters and singing their dialogue, and then suddenly music just starts playing out of nowhere, and suddenly everyone starts dancing and singing, and it's just it's like, what the heck happened? And there's even like a point where this one character, and I'm pretty sure it's the same person, the guy who played Adam, let's see, what was his name, Phineas Newborn the Third. Yeah, I think it was the same actor who played Kelly's friend Adam in the first movie. There's a point near the beginning where he and some other people come up to Kelly and Ozone and invite them to come dance with them or to come see the community center with them, or just come walk with them down the block with them or something. But he literally sings his lines, and this music just starts playing out of nowhere, and then this whole crowd suddenly converges on them, and they start dancing down the street. And as they walk by multiple people and on the sidewalks, the people they walk by suddenly stop what they're doing and start dancing, and so it's just like you're hearing this music come out of nowhere, and you're like, what the hell happens going on here, and and there's even a point where Turbo, who is smitten with this one girl from the community center, he's having this sort of romantic daydream where he's sort of dancing to a song about how much he's in love with her, and somehow he's dancing on the walls and the ceiling. And on one hand, I mean, okay, I will say that visually it's actually kind of a cool scene, and apparently they did that with like a rotating set in real life, but it's okay. So it looks cool. Like, that's probably the one good scene I could think of in the movie. But it makes no sense though. Like, maybe if they had shown that it was a daydream or something, like shows him like doing the dance on from the wall to the ceiling and down to the floor again, and then suddenly like maybe an alarm clock goes off, or he hears a car horn outside and he just sort of snaps out of it and he realizes, oh hey, it was just a daydream or something like that. I mean, that would have at least gone some way to applying some form of solid logic to the movie. But the thing is, stuff like that happens all throughout the movie. Like if Turbo's not dancing on the wall and ceiling, then you have nurses and doctors at hospitals resuscitating dead patients through the power of music. I'm not making this up, okay? I mean, there's a key scene where one of the characters is hospitalized due to unwisely stealing lunch from some construction workers who are trying to bulldoze a community center, and then they accidentally, fall down some steps and break their leg and they end up hospitalized. And so, the characters who come to visit this particular character in question, they, suddenly, start off like a song and dance number, and suddenly everyone in the hospital is singing and dancing. And, nurses are, bringing catatonic patients, back to reality. Doctors are dancing and, bringing dead patients back to life. I mean, and this character who had a broken leg is, soon, sort of, limping and hopping around like it's no big deal, and it's like just it's stupid. I mean, sorry. I mean, like, it's one of those things that, in some instances, something like this would be so bad it's good, but it's bad. Like, there were so many moments where I'm like, I was groaning. I was like, what the hell am I watching? And then there's moments where, yes, I was laughing, but not because it was funny, but just because it's like, how the hell did anyone think this was a legitimately good idea? I mean, if it's like, if, say, it's almost like, okay, just try and, picture this, okay? Scary movie. Let's go with the original Scary Movie. Imagine if that was supposed to be taken seriously, okay? The movie would be considered an unmitigated, disaster, okay? And it would be, so bad it's good, because, the movie's not supposed to be funny, but it is funny. So in this case, it's like, it's like if Electric Boogaloo is, for dancing, in terms of, say, if, like, it's that scenario for a breakdancing movie, or a breakdancing musical, I should say, albeit a very bad one, because it's like, we're supposed to be, I guess we're supposed to be caring about what's going on. We're supposed to be somehow taking this, gonzo movie seriously in some way. And it's one of those things where I feel like if this movie had been a standalone movie, I probably would have had a better time watching it. But because, it came off the heels of the legitimately good movie that Breakin' was, it was like night and day, okay? And so I know that some people out there are probably gonna, be all like, well, hey, that just makes Breakin' 2 that much better, man, or it makes it, fun in all the wrong ways. And I mean, okay, hey, fair enough, good point, more power to you. I've, felt that way about, some movies before, where it's like, so bad it's good. But, Breakin' 2 is just bad to me, okay? Now, I don't know, maybe it's because I was watching it by myself, but to be fair, I mean, I was really groaning and laughing and, at the incredulous, nature of it all. Just like, I can't believe that, one, I'm watching this, and two, I can't believe, someone thought that this would be a legitimately good sequel to Breakin', and so, but, as far as the music goes, okay, you'd think that there'd be some good music in the movie at least, right? You're thinking, okay, this is a shitty movie, but at least there's some good jams to it, right? Because even people who didn't like the first Breakin', even they, admitted that, the dance scenes were good and, the music was good. But now, like, obviously, I thought that the movie was a good movie, so, but Breakin' 2, it doesn't have that. It doesn't have that advantage of to where it's like, well, the movie's shitty, but at least it sounds good. So no, there's I think there's only like one song that I remember actually liking in that movie, and that was Din Da Da by a guy named George Kranz. And you hear that song and it's like, oh, hey, this is kind of an earworm, but in a good way. Like it's a song that gets stuck in your head, but it actually sounds good, and it actually kind of goes along with the scene at hand in a good way, and it sort of harkens back to the magic of the first movie. But unfortunately, though, that's literally the only good song that, that's the only song that I thought was a good song in the movie, because the other songs in the movie, okay, I know it's like some people, like, they think that, the 80s are intrinsically cheesy, and to some degree I can understand. It's like from a cultural standpoint, if you didn't grow up then, or if you didn't grow up around people who did grow up back then, I mean, you're probably not going to, get the coolness of the 80s, okay? But the thing is, it's like, Breakin', they took something that, okay, maybe had a bit of cheese, but they actually made it cool, though. So Breakin' 2, though, just, it was like they did it the other way around. I mean, they took something that was cool, but they made it into nothing but cheese. And so, that one bit where that one good song is playing, and it plays more than once, okay, but it's like the one good song in the movie. And, and the first time you hear it, it's like, it's when Kelly and Ozone and Turbo are sort of, getting back into a swing of things, and, working out, in the studio together for the first time in however long it's been since they've seen each other. And it's like they're getting the old groove back. And so it's like that right there, it was the one scene that harkened back to the first movie, because it's like you see them sort of finding their footing, gaining their chemistry as a group again. Excuse me, sorry. But it's like you find them, getting, their, groove back. And so for just a couple of minutes, you're getting, something that reminds you of the first movie, and you're thinking, okay, maybe that, that first, random musical dance number thing where they literally broke out into song and dance, I mean, you're thinking, okay, maybe that's a fluke, and things are going to get better, from here, because it's like, hey, we're actually kind of back in, for just a little bit, we're back in the vibe of the first movie. But then, nope, that, once those couple of minutes are up, then it's back to, campy musical city. And also, the other thing is the acting, not just by the main actors, but just about everyone else in the movie. And I mean, there was one good actor, or I should say, an actor who I know is good, who definitely deserved better. But Harry Caesar, he plays a guy named Byron, who runs the community center. But, I remember him from the original Longest Yard, the Burt Reynolds football movie. And great movie, by the way, if you're a Burt Reynolds fan. And just, football movie too. But Harry Caesar, was great in the movie as this old timer named Granville. He's one of the prisoners. But so I saw him, like, oh, hey, dude. And so I'm thinking, okay, surely this movie, it can't be all bad. But unfortunately, it's one of those things where, Harry Caesar, I think, like, he's not bad in this movie, but he's not exactly good either. And it's not his fault or anything, but it's just sometimes you have actors who are decent or good actors, but are in a movie that's just so bad that they can't help but sort of have the badness of the movie rub up on them, that kind of thing. So I was like, Harry Caesar, you deserve better, man. But yeah, so like the rest of the actors, though, I mean, like, especially the evil corporate, capitalists, I mean, they're the ones who are all mustache twirlingly evil, okay? I mean, we're talking like every, cliche you could think of when it comes to capitalism or evil rich white people, that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that, and there's a reason stereotypes exist. I get it, okay? But this is an instance where, I feel like if there was an element of the movie that was supposed to be taken seriously, or that the people who made the movie are wanting us to take seriously and are wanting us to be on the main character's side, it's whenever, these evil capitalists are on screen, because there's, nothing redeeming about them. You know, they're just like, you know, that kind of thing. You know, like, yes, we're going to bulldoze this community center and, you know, bring in this soulless architecture of the shopping mall. You know, that kind of thing. But just, it's like, and there were some moments, like in the first movie, where when they were touching on, you know, the, you know, struggle between, you know, classes, you know, and you have the bits of racism. I mean, there were some bits of snobbery that felt a little cartoonish at times, but they weren't going all in on those moments, though. Whereas in Breakin' 2, they were. And so that's where it's like, you know, because the first movie had the saving grace of having, you know, a story that took place in a, you know, somewhat grounded, you know, version of harsh reality, albeit with moments of, you know, magic through music and dancing. It's like the second movie, you know, basically took those, you know, cartoonish moments and amped them up to 11 and made them be the majority of the movie. And so, you know, it's like when it came to like the, you know, just about anyone who was turning their noses up at, you know, the street dancers, or street dancing, I should say. I mean, they just felt so cartoonish, and it's like, okay, I mean, you know, they're just, you know, they're so over the top, I can't take them seriously. And, you know, Adolfo, you know, Quinones, and, you know, Michael Chambers, and, you know, Lucinda Dickey, I mean, they're playing the same characters they played in the first movie, right? But whereas in the first movie, you know, there was, you know, an effort being made, you know, to get us to genuinely care about them, to where it's like there was a certain level of chemistry between them. I mean, okay, Lucinda Dickey still has some wooden acting, unfortunately, but, you know, she was able to offset that, you know, by, say, the chemistry that came with, you know, dancing, you know, with, you know, Adolfo Quinones and Michael Chambers. I mean, but here though, it's like, even though all three of them are on screen together, I mean, the movie is so bad that it's like there may as well not be any chemistry whatsoever. It's just they're all, you know, drinking the Kool-Aid of, you know, what this bad movie is ultimately all about, you know? And so it's like they're all three just as, you know, cheesy and over the top as, you know, the bad guys are in a lot of ways. I mean, you know, like the bad guys are over the top and cheesy in one way, and the, you know, good guys, or the protagonists, are cheesy and over the top in an entirely another way. And so it's like, I mean, yeah, they kind of goofed around, like, you know, Ozone and Turbo, you know, goofed around in the first movie, but they also, you know, they weren't all, you know, it wasn't all fun all the time. Like, you saw the harsh side of what it was like to, you know, basically, you know, live in the, you know, environment that they, you know, were in, and, you know, the struggles that they had to go through in terms of, say, getting acceptance from, you know, people outside of their scene and things like that. So, you know, there was an effort made to, you know, show that, you know, these were human beings, you know, who, I mean, they have dreams and, you know, desires of their own. And so, and to some extent, they even managed to make that work with the character of Kelly, you know, with Lucinda Dickey, in the sense that even though she had some wooden acting, you know, she was able to, you know, work well enough, you know, with Adolfo Quinones and, you know, Michael Chambers, to where it's like, you know, that vibe, you know, shined through for all three of them. But here, though, it's like, you know, they might say words about, you know, their hopes and dreams and everything, but because it's in a really bad musical, you know, movie, I mean, it's just, it rings hollow, and oftentimes it's unintentionally funny, and so it's just yeah, Breakin' 2 was a bad movie. I wish I could say it was so bad it was good, because then at least, you know, I'd be able to give it, you know, 2 stars out of, you know, morbid fascination. But honestly, Breakin' 2 is a movie that I would not want to watch again anytime soon at all. especially by myself. Now, if I were with some friends or something like that, and we're having like a genuinely bad movie marathon or something like that, or I say a genuine bad movie marathon. That sounds better. If we were having a genuine bad movie marathon, I'd be like, okay, guys, here's my pick, Breakin' 2. And so then at the very least, I mean, there's, misery loves company, right? Because we're all watching bad movies and we're all just like, oh God, this is bad. And we're cracking up at how, unintentionally funny it is or something along those lines. But beyond that, Breakin' 2, it's like, no, I do not want to see that movie again. It was that bad, okay? And something that, sort of, kind of threw me for a loop was that Roger Ebert, okay, great reviewer, kind of a gold standard in a lot of ways, but he wrote, like any other reviewer, he did reviews that I didn't agree with him on from time to time, and so Breakin' was one of those movies where I did not agree with him, and if I remember correctly, he gave it 1.5 out of 4 stars, and some of the flaws I could understand. Like, he said that Breakin', felt like 2 different movies, and one in which you are witness to some breathtaking choreography, and then on the other hand you're in a cliche love story or something along those lines. And it's been a while since I read the review, right? But I can understand, the feeling of the movie being 2 different movies, and that vibe is there at times, but not to the point of, say, it being a bad movie, though. So it's like, if I were doing like a 4-star review on, Breakin', I'd easily give it 3 out of 4 stars. But since it's 5 stars review, I'm giving, the first Breakin', 4 out of 5 stars. Now, Roger Ebert, though, for Breakin' 2, he gave that movie 3 out of 4 stars. He gave this piece of crap, Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo, 3 out of 4 stars, okay? Like, he genuinely liked the movie. And I'm just like, dude, I know we all have an off day, but what happened? Like, what were you smoking? Come on, man. But so yeah, I just remembered that, though. But anyway, but yeah, so Breakin' 2, I'm gonna give 1 out of 5 stars to. Okay, if I were drunk or high and with friends, maybe peer pressure, 2 out of 5 stars. But sober and by myself, and having come off the heels of a legitimately good movie that Breakin' was, no, Breakin' 2, 1 out of 5 stars. It was that bad, okay? So, Breakin', good movie. Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo, not a good movie. So if you hear if a movie sequel that you're wanting to check out is being called Electric Boogaloo by some friends of yours or some critics or online people or what have you, remember they're talking about this bad movie, okay? So that'll give you an idea of what you can expect with whatever sequel that all these other people are talking about. So it's like, yeah, Electric Boogaloo, allow it to serve as a cautionary tale of what a sequel should not be. So anyway, yeah, that was my take on Breakin' and Breakin' 2. It was definitely a fascinating experience, watching the 2 movies, so soon after one another. I mean, what with Breakin' being a legitimately good movie and Breakin' 2 being a legitimately bad movie. So, but I will say it was a fun experience, though. So, but yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review of these 2 movies. And you got any questions, comments, please drop a line and let me know. And if you got any, feedback, I'd love to hear it. So, thank you very much for sticking with me on this. And if you made it this far, I appreciate it. And y'all have a good night. Take care. Bye.